Hello everybody, Daniel Clarke-Serret here, the author of Pax Arabica. As you will have discovered from many of the reviews that have been posted on Ger and Shalom, Pax Arabica is a book about Arab imperialism and the hope for Arab decolonization. However, that is a somewhat comic book description of the entire book because it contains many innovative and interesting ideas. Let me start with one in this video which is simple but very important. The idea of the triple-pronged racism. Now this appears in the chapter about Sudan, and I ask the question, why do we know so little about what's happening in Sudan? Why, let's be honest, are we indifferent? And I identify 3 prongs of racism. The first 2 are pretty obvious, but it's the third one that is the innovation. The first reason, the first prong of racism, can be summed up in no Jews, no news. That the world, particularly the West, is only interested in conflicts involving the Jewish people. This almost obsessional concentration on the Jews is, yes, a form of anti-Semitism, because as we can see at the UN, from the amount of resolutions they have passed against Israel, they are only interested in the Jews and scapegoating the Jews. The second prong of racism is also fairly well established, and that is anti-black racism. The fact that what's happening in Sudan is against black people in Africa raises, unfortunately and tragically, a yawn of indifference from many people. They feel that that's what happens in Africa. It really is an awful point of view, but that again is the second prong of racism. But it's the third prong of racism, which is the one that I want to focus on, which is the fact of Arab racism, racism against the Arabs. Now this might seem surprising in a book about Arab imperialism, and I understand that, especially seeing as it is, Arabs in a so-called Arab country who are responsible for the genocide and the other terrible human rights abuses in Sudan. However, it is a form of racism against the Arabs because we treat them as children without any agency, without any responsibility, and without any accountability. In other words, we treat them as cardboard cutouts. We don't treat them as human people, as adults who are responsible for their actions. We see this all over the Middle East, in, for example, the Palestinian society, where the fact that for decades and decades they have rejected the Jewish state, they've engaged in terrorism against the Jewish state, all culminating in October the 7th, well, they're not held to any account for those crimes. It's almost like they are children who we must forgive, forget, and they may not be given any agency to change. And this is a very important third prong of racism, because although they may be the perpetrators of many of these crimes in Sudan, in Syria, in Yemen, and in Iraq, my goal in this book of Pax Arabica is actually also to decolonize the Arab mind so that they may be free. And I particularly want the Arab women to be free from Arab apartheid. And so with this in mind, we must, by we I mean the West, we must give the Arabs agency. That is the way to free them and to free the Middle East. And that is the big message that I'm telling you today from Pax Arabica. If you manage to buy this, either on Ger and Shalom or Amazon, please leave a review. Thank you very much.